And welcome back. I was asked by a student to say, don't forget to like and subscribe. You can. I don't. It doesn't really do anything for me. All right, so the nitrogen cycle. I have actually figured out why they always say like and subscribe. If you get a certain number of subscribers, you get paid, which is crazy. Not my goal in these videos, obviously. The nitrogen cycle is what we're going to be looking at in this video. The nitrogen cycle is another one of our biogeochemical cycles. We just did carbon, now we're going to do nitrogen. Nitrogen cycle, for the most part, when we're looking at nitrogen, we're talking about bacteria, baby. Bacteria in action. Nitrogen fixation is the process of nitrogen being fixed. So this can be caused by lightning or bacteria and cyanobacteria. This is where gaseous nitrogen, like N2, combines with hydrogen and it makes ammonia and ammonium ions, NH3 and NH4. So that's what nitrogen fixation is, where nitrogen turns into ammonium or ammonia. Nitrification is where soil bacteria change that ammonia and the ammonium ions into nitrate ions. Denitrification is when the nitrate ions go back to being nitrogen gas. And so these three processes here are very interrelated, and notice bacteria is a huge part of all of it. So nitrogen fixation takes the nitrogen out of the atmosphere. Nitrification takes that ammonia or ammonium and turns it into nitrate. Nitrate then eventually goes back to being nitrogen gas. Humans are removing nitrogen from the atmosphere faster than it can be replaced, and that is where humans are impacting. So we'll do an activity, or we have done an activity, depending on when you're watching this video, in class, where we kind of pretend that we are a little molecule of nitrogen, and we get to go to each of these different spots to find out, how do I get from the atmosphere to, fertilizer, or how do I get from the atmosphere into plants? Now, we are adding a lot of nitrogen into the atmosphere through nitrogen oxides and from burning fuel and using inorganic fertilizers. And so that's something that's important. We'll talk a lot about this when we talk about atmospheric pollution. Now, normally nitrogen from the atmosphere can only come out naturally in two ways. Either through an electrical storm, lightning strikes, which causes that nitrogen fixation, or with bacteria, nitrification bacteria, that brings it into the soil. Now, both of these eventually get into the soil or the water, depending on what we're looking at. Once it's in the soil, it is ammonia or nitrate. Remember, the bacteria nitrification create that nitrate. That is then able to be taken in by plants and used. The nitrogen in the plants goes from plant to consumer, or producer to consumer, to secondary consumer, to yada, 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 decomposed, and eventually can go back to being ammonia in the soil. Okay. Now, how does it get out of the soil? Well, this arrow here shows you the denitrification by bacteria releases it back into the atmosphere. Now, remember, just like the last graph, the last diagram, all of the red are human impacts. We are taking nitrogen out of the atmosphere to make commercial nitrogen fertilizer. We're also adding it in, like I said. We're also using nitrates from fertilizer runoff and decomposition, which releases it into waterways. And that, of course, will eventually lead to cultural eutrophication. That nitrogen in the ocean sediments then is lost to deep ocean sediments and can be stored in the ocean for long, long periods of time. Nitrogen is a very essential part of life. It's a nutrient that allows for producers and consumers to survive. That is the end of the nitrogen cycle. The next cycle we're going to talk about is the phosphorus cycle.